So this happened at my old elementary school, which is pretty much right behind our house. Anyways, I was walking to go and get my brother, who was 11 at the time, to come back home, and as I approached the park, he was nowhere in sight. I was beginning to get a little bit frantic, because he's a smart kid and knows danger when he sees it, but is so friendly that he'll jump to any offer to go and play video games. So at the time, I'm thinking he may have been with a friend, and so I called my mom and let her know. She said that since a year ago, nobody we knew lived in our neighborhood, and we started freaking out. As I began to look around and ask people if they saw him, one kid knew who I was and told me that he was walking with a few older teenagers to a house a few blocks down. So naturally, I'm sprinting to go and see where he went. He's a gullible kid, and I'm thinking of the worst possible outcomes. I end up finding the house he's at, and it's an absolute shithole. There were some teenagers in the vicinity of the house, and I asked what they were doing, and one told me that they were delivering a package to somebody, and that somebody was the owner of this nasty house. I freaked out. I ran and drop-kicked the door so damn hard I broke it off the hinges. And I ran inside to save my brother. Luckily, he was playing video games as this fucker was watching him. This man was fat, sloppy, and greasy looking. The type of guy that runs a butcher shop. I immediately started yelling at my brother to get up and leave. I'm a big guy at 6'1" and 250 pounds, and as soon as I finished yelling at my brother, I get this guy by the neck and lift him against the wall in a Michael Myers type fashion. Anyways, I get the guy to spill the beans and found out the situation and what had happened. My brother told me these teenagers came up and said that they knew who I was and invited my brother over to play video games. This man paid these kids to find a little boy to bring to his house so he could fondle them and sexually assault them. And he was planning to possibly kidnap them, or worse. I've never been so angry or scared at the same time in my life. I called the cops and they arrested the man on charges of abduction, and he's now in jail. This happened 3 days ago, and I don't know how I could live with myself if my brother was killed right before Christmas. Please, watch over your siblings whenever you can, and stress to them the fact that you don't ever do anything without parental admission. That man is so lucky he didn't die, but I have too much of a future to murder a miserable, sick piece of crap like that. Greasy fuck, let's hope we don't ever meet again. So a little background to start with. This happened mostly through my sophomore year in high school. I'm a senior now. The majority of these events took place in the band room, ironic, right? And multiple girls' bathrooms. This all started with some rumors going around the school about my name in the girls' bathroom. I initially blew this off. It was just some classic rumors about questioning my sexuality as a male. However, it went from simple notes in pen to actual carvings of messages into the wall. Still, I just blew this off, as a girl who I had talked to was known to do things like this in attempts to seek attention. Then, here, we got serious. On a free day when our band director was out sick, we all had to leave our backpacks in the front of the class so the sub could take care and watch them. By the end of the period, I went to grab my stuff and noticed my bag was wide open. I kept looking and saw I was missing a few notebooks. Nothing important, just graded papers and some history book notes. But still, stuff was taken. I thought someone was just messing with me, per the usual thing in band, and didn't ask around. A few days later, some of my girlfriends started asking me who I'd pissed off. Puzzled, I asked what they meant, and they showed me pictures of the walls in the girls' bathroom. Every single wall and surface was covered with papers that had different messages about me. At this point, I was starting to freak out. Then I saw the hundreds of papers in the halls. Soon after we found the source, as my notebook showed backup with all the blank papers missing. Whoever had taken them wrote similar messages on my assignments and cut all of the plastic dividers. I was upset with how they destroyed my stuff instead of the purpose of doing it. All of a sudden, it had just stopped, like that. I was relieved and showed my mom my notebooks jokingly, but she was serious about it. I told her that it had stopped, and so she should let it go. A few weeks later, I was handed a note after class, right before I had band practice. I was late for percussion rehearsal, so I just threw it in my drum case and left. My friend read the note when we got back and was freaked out. It detailed how this person was in love with me and wanted me to notice them. My whole section laughed at it in front of the other sections, but I was still unnerved. After this, my parents started receiving phone calls from burner numbers about me. The notes came back, and that's when the school stepped in. There was a week-long investigation where they questioned most of the girls in the band class. Most of the teachers thought it was a girl who was mad at me because I didn't date her earlier in the year, and they questioned her. Turns out she was actually doing drugs during class, but I digress. The school resource officer found out that it was actually the really quiet and shy and reclusive girl in my class. She had a history of stalking boys and other behaviors. On her Facebook, she labeled the Columbine shooting as a role model and other really violent things. So the school had to file a restraining order against her, and she left the school soon after. I have no idea where she is now, but I'm still worried that I'll be followed to my car. Although I made a personal appearance in this story, the encounter actually happened to my brother. I'll recount it the way he told me it went down. My brother Nova was excitedly going to a midnight premiere with his friend Sam. Both of the guys were young and eager. Basically the most pumped two teen boys can be, because it was a midnight showing of the movie Man of Steel. They had arranged for me, Nova's darling older sister, to pick them up during my lunch. I was at the graveyard shift at the time, once the movie was over. The evening started pretty harmless. Tons of people, a couple of familiar faces. They waved down because it was a pretty small town. But out of nowhere, this older guy and a girl closer to their age approached them. They were sort of dressed like everyone in middle school used to dress, Hot Topic drapery and the like. Still, they weren't very friendly, and due to the high energy level nerd gatherings create, Nova and Sam weren't in the least bit alarmed. Quickly, the man started to act a little bit odd with questions that wouldn't necessarily be deemed as creepy if asked in another way. For example, the man asked Nova, "So, you two young boys are here by yourselves? Guys like you don't have girlfriends?" Nova and Sam exchanged looks and decided to lie. They said they had girlfriends and they just weren't there right then. The man tried to fix the question by adding, "Oh, that's a shame. See, my sister here thinks you guys are really cute, and so do I." Then the man laughed in a flirty way. Now, Nova and Sam were really shocked. Sure, this guy had already heard they were straight, but it straight up felt predatory since he was significantly older than them. He asked more questions, delighted to find out that they were still in high school. Nova was trying really hard to disclose nothing, but Sam was a bit more naive and told one too many details for Nova to be comfortable at all. They were saved right then, though. The scramble to find good seats began, and they ran for one of the theaters. Nova and Sam were relieved when they did find seats and quickly joked off what had happened. By the time the previews were starting, they had calmed down and decided that the creepy man and his sister were just messing with them for their own enjoyment. To their dismay, the man and the sister actually found them and sat right next to Nova. Man made a casual joke about how the two boys had ran and how he was glad to have found them. At this point, the boys were unsure what to do. Nova had never had something like this happen to him, and he really just wanted to see this movie. So the movie started, and the man sat whispering things to them. Nova was a little shocked, as they were overtly sexual comments. Nova just gave the man a pursed lip expression, and leaned towards the movie to ignore the man further. The man then decided to tap Nova on the leg and says he wants to show Nova and Sam something. Trying not to disturb everyone else and stop this insistent man, the boys look, and the man had pulled up his phone with a very graphic gay pornography video. The man just started laughing hysterically, and his sister was also smiling to herself. Nova and Sam really didn't know what to do. They couldn't run, as I was their only ride, and they paid good money for this damn premiere. Nova told the man to stop with the shit, and that there were kids there, and this was complete harassment. Eventually, the movie finished, and the boys bolted it out of there. I was sitting in the parking lot right in front of the doors. They jumped in my car, all out of breath, and shouted, "Go! Go! Drive!" We gunned it out of the parking lot, and the boys were looking all around them. They refused to tell me what had happened until I had gotten them back home. Words cannot describe how furious I was. I wanted to turn around and fold those people up in 5 ways and leave them for a cat toy. In the end, nothing else really came of it. My brother Nova did say that the bizarre experience was, in a way, really educational, that he couldn't imagine being a girl and feeling that type of sexual harassment all the time. Both of the boys decided that, from then on out, they would always take dates to midnight movie showings. This happened in 2013 when I was living in the city with 2 roommates. We were all women and going to school. I wrote everything down immediately after it happened, intending to 1. Have a record of any details should it become important later, since the police didn't file a report, and 2. Share it someday. I never ended up sharing it until now, having recently discovered this subreddit. This isn't a horror story so much as it is maybe a story about stumbling on the aftermath of someone else's, but I was still pretty spooked at the time. So, here's how it all went down. I live in a pretty old house. It's at least 100 years old, which is very typical of the area, but the inside appears to have been gutted and remodeled at some point in its history. Mostly that translates to weirdly sized closets, but it also meant that there was no pre-designed place for the water heater to go. Putting it in the house would have sacrificed space in one of the closets, so they installed it and a heating system under the house in a crude, dirt-floored crawl space. This became relevant last month when a city utility worker needed to go to get my hot water heater. The sole entrance to the crawl space is out back, under the little deck we share with our neighbor. It's a little wooden door padlocked shut. It had been padlocked since I moved in. I don't even think I knew it was there for the first couple of months. So I called the rental company and they sent a guy over who unlocked it, but didn't look inside. When the utility worker had arrived sometime later, it was already getting dark, so I went down with her just in case she needed me to hand her anything. I felt kind of bad that she was working after standard work hours and about to crawl into the cramped, dirty, undoubtedly spidery space under my house. She opens the little door, shines her flashlight inside, and goes, "That's kinda creepy." Since she had just told me that she was used to crawl spaces and not very scared of them, I felt a little bit uneasy and fervently hoped that we would not stumble onto a body. With that in mind, what we did find was actually kind of underwhelming. Inside the cramped space under the house, lit by the tech's flashlight, was an improved camp setup. There was a sleeping bag on a stack of filthy foam camping mattresses, a suitcase spilling clothes out onto the dirt, a clothesline hung yet with more clothes, food and drink wrappers, and stacks of newspapers. She was surprisingly very chill about it. I wanted her to get out immediately so we could call the police, not because I thought anybody was still in there, but because I was worried the improved campsite under my house might constitute some kind of crime scene. I was pretty confident that it must have been very old. We'd had a home invasion a couple of months ago, so we were all very vigilant, and I figured that since we kept irregular schedules and parked out back, we'd have seen a squatter coming and going. There was no smell due to a couple of stupid decisions earlier in my youth. I discovered people squatting in an abandoned building before, and they'd always had the odor of stale urine. But she insisted that, since we had the door open, she'd go in and get the heater working again. I probably should have insisted, but she honestly didn't seem that disturbed, and I figured she knew what she was doing. She found a little pull chain connected to a bare bulb and pulled it, which lit the whole place in weak, yellow light, showing her the way to the appliance. It wasn't enough to light the entire crawl space, but it was enough that I could see that whoever had lived there had made a couple of shelves out of milk crates. She fixed what she had come to fix and sat with me until the cops came. I kind of expected them to tell me that what I was seeing had to be something else, but actually, they refused to look in the crawl space and seemed to take my account at face value. This really wasn't the response I expected, but whatever, I guess. It ends very anticlimactically. I called the rental agency and told them about it, and they sent a crew out to throw out all the stuff and resecure the crawl space. I was not able to be there when they did it, but I asked them to find the most recent newspaper and give me the date, so that I could get some kind of timeline for when this person had been under the house. The latest was June of 2011, 2 years before we moved in. I was able to find out from the rental guy that the house was occupied at the time, but that was really all I found out. In the late 70s, my mom was in her 20s and living in a brand new apartment complex in Houston, Texas. It was so brand new that the phone service wasn't even fully working yet, and her building was one of the last to get access to it. My mom had just gotten back from a vacation to Cancun, and so had made a pretty hefty trip to the grocery store to restock her fridge and pantry. It took her several trips to the car and back, with her unlocking and relocking her front door each time she came in and out. During her trips, she had noticed that a friend of her neighbor's was waiting outside their door. My mom had seen this man, Sven, and even hung out with him and her neighbors, a young couple, several times. He was Scandinavian and quite striking and friendly. On her last trip up the stairs, Sven and my mom made eye contact once again, and he asked her, "Are they home?" with a nod to his friend's apartment. My mom replied that she didn't know. Sven explained that the three of them were meant to go to a movie, but just assumed they were running late. My mom felt bad for him and said that she would offer him her phone to use, but the service was out. Instead, she invited him to wait inside her apartment until her neighbors got home. My mom is a cautious person. Even by her 20s, she had dealt with many creepy encounters. She always locked the door and always looked twice, never made herself look timid, and questioned everyone's motives. She thought that she knew Sven well enough to know that he had well intentions and was harmless. She and Sven entered the apartment and he made himself comfortable on her couch. My mom went to putting her groceries away and grabbed a can of soda. She called to Sven, "Do you want some Coke?" He replied, "No thanks, I brought my own." My mom peeked around the doorway to see Sven arranging lines of cocaine on her coffee table. She walked out to him and he offered her some. She said a quick, "No thanks," and he quickly told her to suit herself and lowered his face to the table with a rolled up dollar bill to his nose. My mom stood over him, watching in confused disbelief. She came over to her senses and told him, "I think you should leave." He scoffed and began to reach for her arm. She tried to pull away, but he grabbed her and began to pull her down on top of him. She ripped herself from his grip and told him, "I am a big, strong girl, and I'll fuck you up. I think you need to leave, now!" He gave her an amused, impressed grin and left her apartment without further trouble. As soon as Sven was gone, my mom locked her door and waited in a state of shock. After several minutes, she looked out her window to see Sven and his shiny Excalibur parked perpendicular behind her car, effectively blocking her from leaving. Panic set in. Her phone was out. Everyone in her family and group of friends knew this. They wouldn't know to be worried when they didn't hear from her. So, she had no way of contacting anyone or leaving for help without Sven noticing. She waited for nearly half an hour, staring out the window to keep an eye on Sven. Suddenly, he pulled away. My mom had her purse and keys ready and bolted out the door, ran downstairs and jumped in her car, locking the door instantly. She thought she was home free, but as she looked in her rearview mirror to reverse, she saw the Excalibur parked behind her again, blocking her from leaving. Horror filled her as she realized that he had just circled the complex in hopes of this very thing happening. He grinned at her from his window, and she struggled with what to do. She put her car in reverse, but he didn't budge. He just grinned even more, laughing to himself. Then my mom realized that his Excalibur he was driving was worth a whole lot more than her beat-up car. She grinned back at Sven, and she slammed the gas pedal, throttling her car backwards as fast as it would go. Sven, fearing for the damage that would come to his car, pulled out of the way quickly, leaving room for my mom to escape. My mom pulled out of the complex. Sven followed. She got onto Highway 59, a very busy highway that went through the most populous parts of the town. Sven followed. He was close behind her, swerving and changing lanes when she did. Up ahead, my mom saw traffic. She swerved in front of a car that had been braking for it, and Sven got left behind. My mom drove to her friend's house, banging on the door to let her in. They sat in her friend's apartment watching for Sven, but he never came. She had lost him. When my mom told friends and family this tale, they thought that she was overreacting and embellishing the story. They knew how cautious she was and figured it was an overactive imagination on her part. Nobody believed her fully until a few months later when looking at a magazine rack, my mom saw Sven's face on the cover of Houston City magazine. She snatched it up and read the story. Sven, who worked at a notorious screw magazine, had been arrested for raping multiple women. He would overpower them when they were in a very vulnerable position, tie them up, rape them, and urinate on them while doing all sorts of other demeaning, humiliating acts to them. He was only convicted of raping 2 of them, but there were other victims whose cases just didn't have enough proof, and without a trace left behind. She wonders to this day if they had anything to do with Sven's antics, or if they were just as unaware as she had been.